Hi, I'm Bob Hunter, tools editor for Wood Magazine. You know, a cordless drill is one of the greatest tools to have in any shop because you can use it for drilling and driving screws, you can do it for countersinking, all sorts of uses, and then it's also good for taking into the home or onto a job site use. They're just a really handy tool. Well, one of the other tools that you may not be aware of that we'd like to kind of introduce you to is an impact driver. A cordless impact driver works in a little differently than a drill, and there's a lot of advantages and disadvantages to it. And so let me just kind of run you through that. I have several examples here of 18-volt drills on the bench. This is what a typical 18-volt drill looks like. You can see it's a fairly sizable tool, weighs about 5-6 pounds, not bad at all, but still just a little bit bigger. This is what an impact driver looks like in the same voltage. In fact, they share the same batteries. This is true among most brands of tools today and cordless tools. So what you can do with this is, this tool weighs about 2 to 3 pounds less than the comparable drill. You can see it's shorter, so you can get it into tight spaces. An example would be if you were working between ceiling joists and you were driving screws, where you normally would have about a 16 to 2 foot span between there. By the time you add a driving bit, the fastener, whether it's a screw or a lag bolt, this gives you a lot more room to get in there and get into tight areas, which this drill, even though it would do the job well, just doesn't quite fit into that same area sometimes. Let me tell you about a few more advantages to these tools. One of the chief advantages of an impact driver is that it has a hammering mechanism inside that delivers rotational force around the bit so that when you're pushing in the screw, you don't have to push quite as hard. We have an animated video segment that we'll show you in just a minute that it shows this in detail, but for now, what you need to know is that it makes it easier for you when you're driving screws so that you don't have to really exert as much arm strength as you would if you were using a standard drill. One of the other advantages is the variable speed trigger on this, so that you can adjust your speed of this as you're driving, just like you would with a regular drill. So if you're doing something, when you're getting toward the end and you're about to seat the screw, you can back off and ease up, and then you can just bring it right into place, real smooth. That also, an impact with that impact mechanism is that when you're driving the screws, the driver bit won't cam out the screw head as much as a standard drill will. You can adjust that when you're working with the clutch on a drill. This doesn't have a clutch, but it gives you a lot more control just by the hammering mechanism and the ability to feather the trigger back and forth. That mechanism also then, it works great in reverse. If you ever have a stuck bolt or a screw that's hard to undo with a regular drill, this hammering mechanism on the impact driver just backs those out like nothing. Even though impact drivers have several advantages, there's also a few disadvantages that you need to be aware of. And the most important one is that these things are loud when you're driving fasteners and that hammer mechanism kicks in, it is loud. So be sure to have yourself a pair of ear muffs or earplugs handy. You'll really appreciate this, especially if you're driving a lot of screws or a lot of bolts. Something else that you need to know is that these things, when you first start out learning, there is a learning curve to these to get used to it, because this tool, when you're driving a screw, the mechanism doesn't kick in, the hammering doesn't kick in right away. It starts out just like a regular drill, and then when it senses resistance, then it starts hammering. So there's a little bit of a learning curve because this turns at a higher RPM initially than your regular drill. So the 18-volt models are a little bit harder to learn on. That's one reason why I like to recommend to people to start out maybe with a 12-volt model. One of these that we've got over here, a little bit smaller. The hammering mechanism tends to kick in right away no matter what fastener you're driving. So they're really a good tool for shop use, for building furniture and projects in your shop. They're also a good supplement to have for a regular drill. A disadvantage that an impact driver has versus a standard drill is when you're gauging a screw depth. If it's in a hidden situation, like if you're into a pocket hole where you can't see the screw head, or if you're working up underneath of a sink and you're driving bolts up to secure a sink or secure the top to the cabinets or something like that, is that sometimes it's hard to gauge how far to drive your screws if you can't see it very well. A normal drill has the clutch to help you in those situations, so that it'll engage the clutch and stop the driving, but an impact driver doesn't have that, so you kind of have to practice and get used to the feel. Another difference between an impact driver and a drill is a drill will have a 3-jaw chuck, which you can put any shank bits or driving bits, drill bits, any of that in there, and tighten them up nicely with the chuck. An impact driver has a 1/4-inch quick connect chuck, which you slide forward and you slide your bit in. For example, this Phillips driving bit, put it in there and slide it in place. Now it locks in securely, but you're limited to only using bits that have a 1/4-inch hex shank on them. But regular driving bits, such as this one, can twist under the impact of those hammering impact forces, because it can just, if you're doing a lot of screws, the steel is just not made to withstand those forces. It'll hold up for a few here and there, but just if you're going to do a lot, you should really look into getting something new that's out there. It's impact-ready driver bits from several manufacturers right now on the market. These are made from forged steel rather than cast, so that they can withstand those forces, and then they won't twist or break off on you. It's easier to see how the impact driver's function works rather than have me explain it. So here's a little animated clip that'll show you how that works inside the impact driver while it's driving a fastener. Inside the driver are a hammer, an anvil, and a spring. When the driver encounters resistance, the spring pulls the hammer back as it winds itself tighter. When the hammer clears the lugs on the anvil, the hammer plunges forward, unleashing the power stored in the spring and striking the anvil. This burst of torque is what allows impact drivers to drive screws into tough material. Now let me show you how a 12-volt impact driver works versus an 18-volt. When using a 12-volt to drive a screw into this treated pine, the impact driver kicks in almost immediately. With the 18-volt, the screw is driven deeper before the impact kicks in, and it takes fewer impacts to drive the screw. Now let's look at the same tools driving screws into hard maple. Here's the 12-volt. And here's the 18. You can see the harder wood demanded a lot more impact torque. The 18-volt handled it much quicker than the 12-volt. So that's an impact driver. It'll never really fully replace your cordless drill. It's always a good tool to have because you'll need it for doing your drilling, and it's a good tool for driving screws as well. An impact driver is just a good supplemental tool to add to your cordless line.